Wonderful. Thank you, Claire, and welcome, sisters. Thank you all for joining us this evening for what I imagine is going to be an inspiring conversation about the future of our children and young people. As Claire said, my name's Kiran Mahil. I'm an educator, I'm a mum, and I'm an activist, and I come wearing all three of those hats for our discussion with Labour's Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. Now, you may all have seen in the news recently that Bridget's begin to set out Labour's vision for education in a bit more detail. So, in a speech given earlier this month, Bridget set out to debunk the myth that in England, our government educates children well. She argued that standards are now falling, school buildings are crumbling, and the relationship between schools, families, and government is fraying. Whilst this might be a surprise to some, if you've been anywhere near education over the past decade, it's an open secret. We know our children are not being educated well enough. There, of course, will be individual schools and individuals in schools who go against the grain, because when a child is in front of you, you do all you can to help them flourish. But the system as a whole is not being set up to educate all of our children well enough. Now, there has been an admission from the 10th Tory Education Secretary that state education in England doesn't work well enough. But she's only made that admission for students with additional needs, for students with SEND. Now, I'd like us to consider that whilst this group of young people can be seen as the minority and therefore on the margins of the system, they are not. They, in fact, speak for so many more of our children. They are the canaries in the mines, the early warning system that should be concerning us all. They may be falling first or being failed first, but reshifting and in some cases restructuring elements of our education system will not only help students with additional needs rise again, but will bring about positive sector-wide change for all of our children. Now, Bridget also acknowledged the impact of COVID on children and young people's overall well-being. And many of us in schools were left bereft and quite confused, actually, with a paltry amount of support and resources from the government to help recover well-being. Now, I believe that investing in a well-being-led recovery would have provided a much firmer foundation for learning to have been rebuilt. So I was encouraged to hear that Labour government has plans to tackle the epidemic of mental ill health among young people with in-school counsellors and community hubs too. But my school-based leadership experience has taught me that providing support directly to young people with wellbeing challenges can really only go so far, because it's often the case that additional needs lie within the family too. So I'm interested in hearing more from Bridget about the relationship between schools and families and society at large. Now, the heart of the conversation this evening is going to be how Labour will restore hope and bring about change to make sure that every child matters again. So with that, Bridget, let's get talking. So the phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," is a well-known one. Who is in your village, Bridget? Whose role and responsibility is it to ensure that every child gets the best start in life, and why?
Brilliant. Just to say, first of all, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many of you, and I really look forward to the conversation. And thanks, Claire, for the introduction, and Kiran for the conversation. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on all of this as well. And I think I saw my brilliant Scottish counterpart, Pam Duncan Glancy, join the call. So great to see Pam, and we're doing lots of work together on some of these challenges that are UK wide, as well as some of the specific issues that we face in England. I was discussing just this very point today as part of a roundtable discussion with a number of people kind of working directly in research with families and charitable organisations as well. I think the life chances of children are all of our responsibility, collective responsibility as a society, to government, especially how the role for government can enable parents and families to live better lives, give them more opportunities, but also open up freedoms and choices that are not otherwise there. Alongside that, of course, families, parents have responsibilities too, and also the wider education system, not just our schools, but all of those support services. So I think we need to recognise that schools have got an incredibly important role to play in supporting our children, but we can't load more and more expectations onto schools and expect that schools can solve, and the amazing people working within our schools can solve every wider societal failure. That's why I do think it's so important that the work that we've been setting out through the missions is about how we work together across government. So education, working with health, we can't deliver better life chances for children if we're not joining up those services that families need. And that's precisely what the mission is all about delivering. And we can talk in a bit more detail about what that would look like from government and our plans around it. But I think the fundamental shift that we need to see is having a department for education that is focused on children's voices, children's life chances, and a wider encapsulation of the role for government in providing children with every opportunity to achieve and thrive, and where background is genuinely no barrier to getting on in life, and where every child can find something they enjoy, can find areas of strength, and can have really good options, particularly when they make some of those changes, especially in the kind of 16, 18 and onward space. Far too many of our young people don't get the opportunities that they need at that point, and we store up lots and lots of problems for the future.
Thank you. So I was hearing there's joint responsibility. Schools can only go so far. There's an important role to be supporting and empowering parents to make sure that children have what they need to develop and flourish. Now, just on that point, then it has been potentially, you could argue, a challenge in the past for Labour to be either on the side of teachers or on the side of parents or on the side of children or on the side of all three. So what's your thinking in how best to strike that balance between the really important people that are involved in ensuring that our children do get the opportunities they deserve?
I mean, first and foremost, it's children that have to be at the heart of our thinking. What is, how we give all of our children a really great start in life, and also throughout their childhood, but also into adulthood. I think we need to see a bigger shift in terms of recognizing that education isn't something that ends when we're children or when we leave the classroom or the lab or the library. There should be opportunities for people right throughout their lives as well. And we can't make any of this change happen unless we work with the amazing people right across our education system, whether that's our educators and early years workers when children are young, through schools, further education, higher education, and training providers. There are some amazing people working right throughout education, and it's been such a privilege these last 2 years as Shadow Education Secretary to meet with so many of them right across our country. But there are real problems there at the moment. We will probably come onto this, I imagine, both in terms of recruitment and retention right across the education system. That's why it's so important that if we win the election, we put education back front and center of national life once more. It's been a peripheral issue. The Conservatives, in the 2 and a bit years I've been in this job, I've had 5 opposite numbers as Education Secretary, and one of them lasted little more than a day. It's not been a big issue for the Conservatives, and that has to change. And some of the measures that we've set out around raising the status of teaching, around the need to recruit more teachers, also our support staff in our schools, giving them a voice once more through a school support staff negotiating body, is about raising the status and standing and making sure that we do genuinely listen to all of those working in education. Now, there will be times where we disagree. I'm sure that will be true where it comes to discussions with some of our trades union colleagues. But I think we need to reset that relationship between government and education, and also between education and families, because at the moment it all feels very fractured.
So much in there, Bridget, that we could go next. So we've gone. I've heard you talk about lifelong learning, which actually has not been part, I feel, of the conversation for a very long time, and the early years too. And as you pointed out, the chronic problem in our schools, in the sector, in terms of staffing. So I just want to hear more from you first, I suppose, on lifelong learning, and your assessment as to why perhaps that's not something that has been of importance from the previous government, and what Labour's view is on that, and what it would do, therefore, to demonstrate its view about lifelong learning.
I think what we did really effectively when we were last in government was creating opportunities for people where perhaps they didn't have a good experience of education first time around and provided routes back into it. Opportunities for community-based learning is the first step, because crossing that threshold into a big, scary, huge college can be such a barrier for people if they've had bad experience themselves. Also, the brilliant work that we did from government where it came to family learning, so involving parents with their children's learning as a mechanism also to engage adult learners too, because there are real issues for many people around confidence and the bad experiences sometimes that they might have had. But alongside that, I think we've got a real opportunity as a country with the shift that we're going to see in the economy in the years to come with the transition to net zero, to provide really good, high quality opportunities to retrain, to upskill, with a focus on modular learning, better connected to employers as well. And what we've set out around that in terms of delivering technical excellence colleges that build on regional strengths where it comes to certain parts of the economy, and alongside that apprenticeship levy reform too. So greater flexibility so that it can be targeted to areas where we need to develop as a country, but also where we have real opportunities for strength, and to bring together businesses and colleges as a part of that. Because, just to give one example, I meet apprentices across the country who are often able to study and learn in the most fantastic facilities, the investment where there's been capital investment. And it's so frustrating that often those resources go underused, whether it's at evenings or weekends, because there isn't the funding there within the system to make it happen. And the apprentices will be going back to their workplaces with the people that they're working with day in, day out, opportunities to upskill and retrain. I think there's a real moment for us as a country to capture that and to seek to do things differently.
Thank you. So real, hearing there the idea of ensuring that there is solid regional understanding of what's needed for when upskilling needs to be take place and where those opportunities might be, to make sure that they are, I suppose, reachable and tangible for people who would like to pursue learning for life. Now, on the point you mentioned, then I suppose the economic benefits of an approach like that, and the need to make sure that we are a highly knowledgeable, highly skilled workforce, because we will that will help grow our economy too. Now, another way of growing our economy, you could argue, is ensuring that we have childcare infrastructure in place to allow all parents to work and all children to develop as well in the time when parents are working. So what do you want to tell us more about childcare, how significant it has been in your thinking and education more broadly, and what Labour's offer might start to look like?
I mean, this is a big priority for me. I think it's vital in so many ways that we make childcare and early years education more available and more accessible to families across our country. I mean, this often does drift into a conversation about opportunities for women. And whether we like it or not, it's women who are often denied opportunities to go back to work, or in the kinds of jobs they want to be doing, the kinds of hours they might want to be working, because of a lack of available childcare. So there is, we have to have a shift as a country in not regarding childcare and early years education as a nice to have. It has to be a central part of our infrastructure in terms of how we support families. We're doing a lot of work in thinking about all of this. What I've set out is that we're committed to delivering a modernised childcare system from the end of parental leave to the end of primary school. The first step around that being universal free breakfast clubs in every primary school, because all parents of school-aged children know that your childcare issues don't end when your children start at school, but also really strong and clear evidence about the improved outcomes for children arising out of breakfast clubs, whether it's attendance and academic outcomes, and really strong evidence around that, which is, I think, important in all of the work that we're doing, making sure that it's based in strong evidence around what's effective in supporting children. Where the Tories, I think, have got things the wrong way around is they responded in haste to the pressure that we'd been applying in the budget last year, But what all we've ended up with is a pledge around childcare and no plan to deliver it, which is why already they've got to the position where come April, many providers are just saying they're not going to be able to provide the funded hours that the government says parents will be able to access because there is no workforce plan, no plan to make it happen, and also no plan to drive up standards in the sector too. That's why I've asked Sir David Bell, who was formerly the Chief Inspector of Ofsted, to lead Labour's early years review so that we can deliver the places and the high standards and the workforce that we need to make sure that we've got a really fantastic early education system that delivers better life chances for children as well as improved work choices for parents.
Now, I don't think anybody joining us this evening is going to necessarily disagree with Labour's vision for ensuring the early childhood development alongside real practical support for families that are juggling work and parenting. But I suppose where will the funding come from? We've talked about in terms of the education offer. There's been a lot made of the VAT status on private schools to fund some of the work that will need to take place in schools. But in the early years, which seems to me as an outsider looking, and I've experienced it as a service user early on when my children were young, it seems very broken. A huge postcode lottery, a mixture of private and sometimes unregulated providers in that 0 to 5 years. So I suppose it's kind of, are we confident that Labour does have a plan that can grip the scale of that problem? And are we confident that the funding that might be needed in order to grip that problem will also be there?
I mean, everything that we set out in every area of our policy, right across the ranks to be we can deliver and where we've got a plan to make it happen. And apologies, I'm not sure if my internet is holding up. I'm getting messages saying it's unstable, so apologies if I drop out occasionally. I've been looking around the world at the great examples that we can see around other countries that are doing things differently. So, for example, when I was in Estonia, looking at how they integrate early years education into the education system overall, we don't have this separation that we have all too often here in England between what happens before the age of 5 and thereafter. I've also been really interested in the work that they've done in Ireland around the new funding model that they've introduced and how use that as the basis for driving. Absolutely, you have to have a workforce plan behind all of that. One figure that really strikes me is a figure the IFS have presented to us, which is that following the changes in the budget last year, 80% of the cost of childcare is going to be met by the government in the years to come. Now, that is a large sum of money, but do we really think that at the moment we're using that money to best effect in terms of providing more opportunities for progression and training for staff, or making sure that we're driving up the quality of the provision and better aligning it with schools so that when children make that transition to their formal education within the school system, they're well prepared for what comes next. So I think there is a lot that we can and will do if we win that election. And Sir David Bell's work that's underway at the moment will also provide us for a strong basis to set out to address the challenge around places in particular, which unless we get to grips with the challenge around places, the government can make commitments all they like about what parents can and should be able to access. But if providers are just not able to offer it, and if they don't have the staff to do it, then I think a lot of parents are going to be bitterly disappointed.
Absolutely. I've just reviewed the chat very quickly, and I think there are some questions regarding. I'm going to stay in the early years for a bit longer regarding Sure Start, and I think lots of Labour people really are proud of the introduction of Sure Start, what Sure Start did, not just for
you guys are too noisy.
The children who experience the services of Sure Start, but also the the assets that it was built within the community as well. So just some thoughts from you about Labour's approach now on Sure Start centres. We know a lot of them have been cut due to austerity and local government funding and the situations there. But what do we think? What is possible to bring back, to reignite the Sure Start offer?
I mean, like all of you, I'm incredibly proud of what we achieved in government last time around, and Sure Start was one of our proudest achievements. And, you know, a whole generation of children benefited from that wide range of provision that was there, and support that subsequently that demonstrated not just not just the impact in terms of immediate, you know, life chances for children, but for example, the reduced hospital admissions that arose out of that. I mean, quite remarkable what was achieved in that time. The challenge that we face right now, of course, is an economy that's in a really, really bad way, which is why Rachel Reeves is absolutely right in setting out that we have to get our economy growing if we want to be able to invest in our public support children, families, and especially in the early years as well. I think what is important probably to note around Sure Start is that, you know, we launched that from government in 1998. It was something that we committed to and developed from government, not ahead of the 1997 general election, for many of the same reasons, you know, that we have today, which is wanting to demonstrate that everything we set out, we've got a plan behind it in order to deliver it, but also we're clear about how we're going to pay for this. And, you know, the economy is arguably in even worse shape now than it was before the run up to 1997. So we'll face lots of challenges, but I think it's clearer than ever about how connecting services together, bringing them together around families, but also crucially providing opportunities for the parents to spend time with one another, to learn from one another, and then the route through. And we talked before about lifelong learning. Sure Start centres, I think part of what is overlooked was just how important they were for many mothers in particular in providing a route back into education and back into employment, and being able to meet with other parents, being able to do so in a way that is not judgmental, where you can learn from one another and support one another, is so incredibly important. And what's clear to me coming out of the pandemic is just how much of a hit we took when parents weren't able to, you know, speak to one another about the challenges that come of being a parent. And, you know, when I hear from primary school teachers and school learn, perhaps having not been toilet trained or experiencing some difficulties that perhaps should have been picked up sooner, I think the part of that is it's just that bit easier if you're a parent with other parents, where you notice that perhaps they're toilet training their children and you think, well, perhaps, you know, maybe I should be thinking about that. There weren't those opportunities during the pandemic. And that's why, you know, you mentioned earlier about the need for post-pandemic recovery. It is scandalous that the government, you know, commissioned that work from Sir Kevin Collins and then did so little about it, given we know that it will cast a very long shadow over the life chances of children. But it will take us time to get to where we want to be. The government have obviously brought in family hubs, much smaller in number than the Sure Start centres that we rolled out across the country. So a big job of work to be done there. But absolutely those principles around early support for families, joining together services, and also just providing places for parents to meet, to get to know one another, and a stronger sense of community is incredibly important, and is just as important now as it was back then.
Yeah, it is of great comfort to a lot of us working in the sector to hear somebody who recognises the wider benefits of the institution itself, whether that's a Sure Start centre or whether that's school. Yes, there are, if we go back to schools, there are of course the academic qualifications, the next step to a child's learning, but it, you know, we firmly believe, I'm certainly in the school that believes that we are an institution in the community, anchored in the community, and can do a lot more by joining the dots, ensuring that there is a proactive level of kind of care and support for not just the students in our care, but the wider family as well. Now, on that, it kind of takes us back to, I suppose, one of the questions that I opened with in terms of, the village, who's in it, whose responsibility is where. Now, you did say at that point that you recognise that schools can't solve all of society's ills, really, and we can't overload schools and teachers with those responsibilities. But there'll be a lot of people on the call, and a lot of LWM members particularly, who'll be interested probably to see what we think schools' role might be in helping us to halve male violence, which is one of Labour Party's kind of missions, is to make sure that there is a reduction in male violence. And the kind of culture of misogyny that is growing, and it is growing particularly with a kind of younger generation as well, with influencers like Andrew Tate and others. So I just kind of, any of your reflections in terms of any expectations on schools, why you might think that's important, that is the case, views and thoughts on schools' roles there.
I think just on the wider point first, before the more specific, on the wider point about the role for schools, schools are such important community anchors, and in many places they're the last thing standing in terms of where parents can get an access support. And that's, I suppose, part of the reason that often schools at the moment feel, and school leaders and teachers and staff feel, overwhelmed by the volume of what is coming their way, because there just isn't anyone else. So they're dealing with housing issues around young people's mental health, the rising levels of child poverty that we see in our country, putting their hands in their pockets to provide food for children, washing clothes. You'll see this, and you'll be living this every day, Kiran. And it's amazing what people's generosity, what they will seek to do. But I would much rather that school leaders could focus on how they support teaching across their school, how they focus on supporting their staff, how they think about, raising standards, and had to spend less time on managing buildings that are falling down and less time on dealing with wider pressures around bringing up housing departments or speaking to landlords or whatever it happens to be. It's wonderful that people do it, but it's a wider government failure that means they're having to step in and do that. And what we've set out around mental health provision in terms of mental health counsellors in all our secondary schools, community access, mental health hubs, breakfast clubs in our primary schools, is about making the job of schools easier. I appreciate it, we're asking for things to be delivered through schools, but we will fund it. We will make sure that it's manageable and achievable for schools to do it. And it will relieve some of that pressure that we're seeing in the system. I mean, on the wider point about misogyny, I mean, it's a challenge right across our society, sadly. And Yvette Cooper is also doing some brilliant work around tackling violence against women more widely. Where it comes to schools, I'm really troubled by the reports that I hear from young women, but also increasingly from school staff about what they're having to deal with. Often this drifts into a conversation about social media, and I think it is important that we think about that and reflect on that. But I think there are also problems that are going on directly within schools that need addressing. Sorry. Apologies. So I think that, for example, one area I think we can do more, and where I've said Labour would do things differently, is around the role for Ofsted in considering wider issues of safeguarding, and I would include that very much within that space. I also hear schools telling me all the time that they need greater support and guidance around how to manage this too. I think Ofsted had started to do some work around this. It was through Everyone's Invited that we started to, I think, begin to understand what girls are experiencing day in, day out. But sadly, some of the behaviour that I saw and experienced when I was at school, I would have hoped might increasingly become a thing of the past. And sadly, it really isn't. And I am concerned about those attitudes that we experience, and also what that means for staff, as well as what that means for young women.
Thank you. So clearly schools are a partner in ensuring a more equal society and to drive down some of the hate that we are seeing. But the expectation perhaps is that schools can't do it alone. These things need to be resourced. And also, I think it was interesting you to hear a widening, I suppose, of Ofsted's parameters and thinking about this space as well when considering their judgments about schools. Now, let's just stay on Ofsted and Ofsted reform. It is and remains a very hot topic within education. Especially following recent tragic events. Now, what's your thinking on the balance between the need to have accountability for public money, to offer information to parents so that they can make informed choices, and what you hear perhaps from the profession in terms of Ofsted not necessarily driving school improvement in that way? Your views on Ofsted?
Yes, thanks. I believe that accountability and external scrutiny are important, and right know what's working well and where improvement, what our plan is doing, but also areas for improvement. Alongside that, an annual review of safeguarding to take account of issues like off-rolling, attendance, what we were just discussing a moment ago, where it comes to wider issues within the school, separately from the inspection that would happen around the quality of education. I think in addition to that, we need Ofsted to provide schools and trusts with routes to improvement where change isn't happening. Now, Ofsted isn't there to do school improvement, but I think there could be a stronger role in supporting schools with what they need in terms of improvement happening. I've also set out how we would reform the system that exists at the moment, so a greater focus on schools that have been struggling for the longest, with a change to regional school improvement teams to make sure that schools are well supported to deliver improved outcomes. I set out, we obviously we've seen the tragic death of Ruth Perry, and I've met with Ruth's family to discuss this. But I think it is important that we make sure we get a better balance where it comes to maintaining strong accountability so that parents and the wider world can understand what's working well, but alongside that, a greater focus in supporting schools to make change and recognising strengths that are there. At the moment, it feels that the reports don't capture what parents want to know and are too high stakes at the same time for staff.
Yeah, I think you've answered my supplementary there, which was our kind of views in terms of our Ofsted report, how useful are Ofsted reports for parents, and is there that piece of work to be done as well to make sure that if that's one of the purposes of the inspection system, that there is efforts to move the parameters of what is inspected and what is reported and how it is to give parents the information that they perhaps actually want and need when making those decisions. Now, we will be going to the questions in the chat soon. Before we do, though, I just wanted to talk about, I suppose, what you think, what more can and should be done cross-government to ensure that children are lifted out of poverty, so that they can realise their full potential, and I suppose what are we hearing from Labour in that space, because we might have a plan for education, but it will fall short unless there is a national plan, in my view, to drive down the number of children living in poverty.
Absolutely. And, what we did last time around in government, both in terms of improving education and better outcomes for children, was alongside a national push to tackle child poverty. And we made such tremendous progress in government. The lives of children and families transformed as they were lifted out of poverty, alongside, major investment, whether it was in the buildings themselves, but also in improved support for children, whether that was through the education maintenance allowance and alongside, major shifts around the family support that was available. does absolutely, as you say, have to involve work across government. So it has to involve the work of the DWP, of health, and many others. And that's why we have got a commitment around a cross-governmental strategy on tackling child poverty. It's in our DNA. It's what we believe. It's absolutely what we want to do. It's why I came into politics. It's what I believe very strongly, and it breaks my heart to see every day in my community and in the lives of so many children across our country how their lives are blighted by poverty. That is avoidable. That is about political choices and where different political choices can lead to better outcomes. And when you think of the ambitious plans that we had around the anti-child poverty targets for it's scandalous that the government have, not just pulled back from that, but increasingly we see more and more families pushed into poverty, and tackling it absolutely has to be a national priority. And as you say, we won't get the, we won't see improvements in education or health or much more besides, unless alongside that we tackle poverty too.
Absolutely. I agree with Bridget. Now, on that note, I think I'm going to move to for the final sort of half an hour or so. I think the chat has been very busy actually, so I will go through and try to bring out questions, but I might have to be ably guided by Claire or Jane to extract some of them. You did mention, Bridget, at the start that Pam is on the call as well, our Scottish Labour Shadow Cabinet Secretary. So I just wondered whether it might be nice for us all to hear from Pam as well. So Pam, if you're still on the call, I'm not sure if you are, please do unmute.
I'm here. Yep.
Oh, lovely. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you. This was unexpected, and I hope I don't. I feel a bit like I'm gate crashing, Bridget and Kiran and Claire. But thank you for the opportunity just to say hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Pam Duncan-Glancy. I'm Scottish Labour's Shadow Cabinet Secretary for Education. So I've been working really closely with Bridget and the team to look at what we can do to improve education and deliver high and rising standards in education across the whole of the UK. And I think in short, if I was to describe what's going on here in Scotland, I think it's a bit of a mess. Since I was appointed as Shadow Cabinet Secretary in April last year, every stone I've turned on education in Scotland, from early years schools into colleges and universities, there have been fraught with problems. Some of them similar to what we've heard so far in the conversation around failing pupils with additional support needs in Scotland. We're not closing the attainment gap at the pace that we should be, and in fact, it's stagnating now. We're plummeting in the PISA tables, where we used to once be the envy of the Western world, and in those, and we're really struggling to keep pace with even our neighbours, our closest neighbours across the UK when it comes to reading and writing. So we've got some serious problems for our children and young people in Scotland. Scottish Labour are hoping to, over the next year or so, develop policy as to what we would offer in the 2026 election. So I said to Bridget and her team recently at a meeting we had in London that we're about a year behind in terms of election schedules and policy development, our colleagues in the UK, but we're watching closely. But what we're absolutely certain about is that we'll be looking at what we need to do to ensure the curriculum is broadened. We know that STEM subjects are not ordinarily being accessed by women in particular, and also girls and people from poorer backgrounds. We know that we need to take action in the early years, and that includes looking at how we can ensure we support the PVI sector, but also what we do to ensure play-based approach, but that also recognises that pupils need to learn to read and write as well, and take a stage and age-based approach to that. So there's various different things that we're going to be looking at in the coming months in Scotland, and anyone who is up and about and keen to come up and have a conversation with us would be very, very welcome. And I'm also happy to engage anytime and answer questions if there are any, but I'm happy just to be here to listen as well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Very generous offer, really helpful for us to get a sense of what's going on in Scotland. And I think what I've heard from both Pam and Bridget is the problem is real. It's really quite dire. The system across the board is a mess, and our children are being robbed of the opportunities that they really deserve. But we're also beginning to see the hope and the offer and the thinking that is going in place, and the central importance of children and families to how Labour wants to govern and who it's governing for. So thank you ever so much for sharing that with us, Pam. Now, I am trying to negotiate the chat. I have seen lots of comments, and I raised in my early remarks issues to do with or problems to do with the system failing children with additional needs in particular. So Claire, I'm going to come to you to see if you have managed to group together, I suppose, lots of people's questions about children with SEND.
Yes, so I would say, I mean, thank you all for the comments and questions in the chat. They are so interesting. We could lose ourselves for more than a single evening, I think, in the discussions. If I could group together a few things that have come up more than once to attempt to be democratic about it, that we have a couple of questions around academy chains and keeping multi-academy trusts to account for their standards and curricula. We have a couple of questions around things schools could be doing that not all schools are doing currently. So, you know, financial literacy education, consent education. I suppose we've talked a little bit around, you know, where schools' responsibilities lie and the rest of the world begins. But perhaps I could cheekily just bracket all of these into, would Labour make citizenship education compulsory once more? And then lots of questions around free school meals. Obviously, Bridget's spoken to the strong business case for breakfast clubs, but is universal free school meals next in Labour's planning if we were in better financial times? And then on SEND, for example, so Rifa talks about being a carer to her son with the SEND and discrimination that he's experienced, and particularly SEND provision in among BAME communities and really boroughs with intense need. Lots of parents in similar situations coming through there. So I suppose, can we just touch on it about where we're up to with the horrible delays and lack of support, etc.
Thank you.
Great. Do you want me just to come in there, Kiran? Is that?
Please do. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Thanks very much. I mean, on children with special educational needs and disabilities and the whole system that we've got at the moment, we could have a session exclusively on this topic. We could fill in more than an hour and a quarter on this alone. The system that we've got at the moment, in the words of the Education Secretary, is lose, lose, lose. It's not meeting the needs of parents or children, not getting support where it's needed, and isn't working for schools increasingly either. I think there will be a need to look at the whole landscape around specialist provision in terms of making sure we've got the right places, and that we also have more practice supported within our schools. Now, what often wide range potentially of additional needs and support that's required for children. So I think there is more that can be done where it comes to training for school staff, indication of need, and making sure that we're identifying problems quickly where they arise. Because in many cases, if the right support can be put in place quickly and early, then we can avoid children becoming disengaged, but also making sure that the right support is there as quickly as possible. So one area that we've set out is around when children arrive at primary school, making sure that we've got a really, really strong set of interventions around speech and language support. We know we face really big waiting lists where it comes to specialist provision, but for many children with the right intervention early, and there's one area that we've set out, we would ask all primary schools to roll out the Nuffield early language intervention, which has been shown to be incredibly effective in supporting children. It also means we're identifying problems more quickly. And then alongside that, we can make sure that the specialist provision that's there is for children whose needs are most acute and where they do require external specialist support. But at the moment, the waiting lists, whether it's for CAMS, for speech and language support, for physio, everything is just not working. And, I do have to be upfront about the fact that, after 14 years of a failure to invest in the crucial infrastructure of our country, whether that's health or education, this is one area where it will take us time to make real and lasting change. And I think it's also incredibly important that if we're going to make change in this area, we do so in a way that engages with families and parents who often feel so forgotten in discussion that's taking place there. Where it comes to academies, for me, it's about seeking to smooth the difference between academies and maintained schools. And I think there's a lot that we can do there. But I wouldn't want us to get too bogged down in a fascination around structures when I think there's a lot that needs to happen at the moment around standards and wider support. I've noticed in the chat as well, I had a quick skim through it too, that people were asking about multi-academy trusts and the role for Ofsted. Yes, we do believe that multi-academy trusts should be inspected in a separate inspection alongside individual inspection of schools. And multi-academy trusts are so crucial in driving what goes on within schools. I think it is right and necessary that takes place. Ofsted are already looking at considering what that would look like, but I do think it is vital that it happens because, often the way in which education is delivered or policies or practices that will exist within one school will be driven at a MAT level, not at individual school level. So I do think we've got to take account of that. We also do need to look afresh at the role for local councils. And I believe they need a stronger coordinating role where it comes to managing place planning, for example, which in the years to come is going to become more and more of a challenge with the demographic shift that we're seeing, the falling birth rate, fewer children coming through the school system, which will mean some difficult decisions will have to be taken about how we manage the schools estate that we've got. This hasn't happened before in a fragmented landscape, so we need to think carefully about how we get that right. Around a kind of curriculum overall, I'm determined that we do reform the curriculum to make it more relevant and more up to date. And that's why I've set out that if we win the election, we'll deliver an expert-led review of the curriculum from government. That will take time to do its work in order to get it right. I don't believe it's an area that you can rush because of the potential consequences that are there. We want to make sure it's absolutely right. And that's where we will take account of what needs to be within the curriculum and also how we make sure that all young people are leaving school ready, particularly leaving school and leaving compulsory education ready for that next part in their lives. I do believe we need a focus around oracy, around speaking and listening skills, communication skills, digital skills, making sure children are well prepared. And also, I think there are different challenges as well at different parts in the system. So, perhaps some of the changes that will need to be considered at primary level will be different to secondary level, for example, but it will take us time to do that work. And I think it is vital that it is expert-led. But as an immediate change that we would make, we would reform the Progress 8 measure to insist that all young people are able to study a creative or vocational subject until the age of 16 while the review is doing its work. So we will start to see change happening quickly alongside that review, which will, as I say, take its time to do that work thoroughly. On free school meals, I spent part of my childhood on free school meals, so I understand and I'm sympathetic to the arguments around this. Our first step would be around breakfast clubs to make sure that children are getting a great start to their day. Of course, we'll continue to review the evidence around the impact it has, but we do have to set out plans that are fully funded and fully costed. I think that's right, and therefore we're not in a position to commit to universal free school meals. But I am following with interest the work that's going on in London, for example, and I look forward to the external evaluation of that in shaping our thinking into the future. But for me, part of my priority, and this is a wider point, is how a Labour government would seek to give parents and families greater freedom and control over what's right for them. So putting more money directly into families' pockets so they can make choices about how they want to spend money and live their lives. And it breaks my heart to see so many parents and families not able to take their children on a bus to go to the library or get an ice cream in the park or have a day at the beach because they just don't have the money to do it. And I want all parents and children to have happy, fulfilled experiences and childhoods, and not just having to scrape by day to day. And for so many people, it's just a daily grind to get to the end of the week or just to get to the end of the month. And I want our children to have happy, fulfilled childhoods, and I want us to think big about how we make sure we can deliver that.
Thank you, Bridget. And on that point about happy and fulfilled childhoods, and our part of that, I think, is based on the daily experience, the daily student experience, and how our students are experiencing school. Now, you mentioned the curriculum review, so a kind of acknowledgement there that perhaps something needs to be re-looked at in terms of what is taught and what students are able to learn and how they learn in schools. Now, I know you'll need to wait for that'll be expert led, and it'll have to be. It's good to hear actually that it will be managed, because having been in the process of multiple curriculum reforms, not really sensible at all. I do believe the curriculum needs to be reformed, but it should be managed in a way that it can happen successfully in schools. But on that, do you have any principles that you're working towards in terms of the curriculum offer in schools? Any ideas of where you may be directing people to look at, or information from elsewhere, examples that you've seen in other countries, to give us perhaps some indication as to what Labour might be valuing in a curriculum?
Yeah, so we've set out some of the principles around that in the mission document, which I'd encourage people, if they haven't taken a look, to go and have a look, which is on the Labour Party website, because it does set out in quite a lot of detail a lot of our thinking around education, but also some of the cross-cutting issues that we've been discussing, whether it's child poverty and much more besides. For me, it's about making sure that we've got a breadth for children and young people so that the curriculum isn't as narrow as it's been in recent years. And I think we have seen a real narrowing that's meant increasingly, parents, it's where parents can afford to pay for clubs and classes, that's fine. But for lots of families, that just isn't an option. So it's about making sure we're delivering through the curriculum a range of opportunities for children and young people. We are thinking seriously in terms of what the terms of reference would be should we win the election, and we're in a position to deliver curriculum review. There are limits to what you can do from opposition rather than from government, and hopefully we might get the chance from government to start this process if we win the election. But I do believe it is important that it is expert-led. I think we saw the problems that come of politicians inserting perhaps rather unhelpful personal experiences or anecdotes into what ought to work and what shouldn't work, down to which books children should or shouldn't be reading within the school. I think that is entirely the wrong way around. And I think as a part of the review, what we also need to think about is how we make sure that young people's lives, their experiences, are reflected in what they study. And alongside that, how we make sure that teachers have a degree of agency around how they approach it, and perhaps some more flexibility where it comes to opportunities to better tailor what they're teaching, perhaps to local circumstance or to the needs and backgrounds of the children that they're teaching. That's about making sure it's broad rather than about it being narrow. And I do think it will be vital to take account of all of those range of issues as part of that review.
Thank you very much. Right, I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple more questions so we can take another round. I've seen one from a head teacher in Staffordshire regarding school funding and the idea of and school funding needing to be fair. Now, we heard about the fair funding formula in schools, but actually just using the word fair doesn't mean that in fact funding now is fair. Children across the country are funded very, very differently. And Maria's arguing this is creating huge inequality. So how can that be a focus of Labour in terms of school funding? And how and what it will fund. And I saw another question. There were lots around, I suppose, the workforce and teacher kind of recruitment and retention. You spoke a bit there about teacher autonomy, and perhaps that's having an impact as well. I think you also mentioned, an expert-led review, kind of listening to the profession, actually really understanding the experience that the profession can kind of bring to politicians, which might help boost morale. But I suppose what more can be done? There was a very specific question which I am looking for about recruitment and retention. One particularly, I think, in maths. And the challenges that might bring. And here it is. Labour's plans for retaining working mothers in the teacher workforce. Emma Shepherd is saying that I've lost it because another one's come in. I think it was women aged 30 to 39 are the most significant kind of leavers out of the profession. And that is corresponding usually with them starting a family. So what more can be done, I suppose, about flexibility within the profession? So yeah, funding and teacher, school staff retention and recruitment.
Funding is a real issue, and the government proudly boasts that by the time of the election we should have returned to 2010 levels of spending within our schools. I'm not sure that's something to be altogether proud of, but alongside that, it goes to the point around the lack of wider infrastructure that's there. So even though the levels might be returning to where they once were in 2010, what isn't there, as was the case in 2010, was that wider infrastructure that we was discussing earlier around, better support around families. We didn't have this, I'm not for one moment suggesting that everything was perfect where it came to support for children with special educational needs and disabilities, but we didn't have the same levels of waiting lists. We didn't have the same waiting lists within the NHS. We had more health visitors, for example, that were able to support families and much more besides. So it's all of that picture together. One thing that really strikes me when the Institute for Fiscal Studies came to present to the Shadow Education team to look at where we are in terms of education as a country. And one of the most striking slides that they presented was the graph where they showed how over the last 14 years, money has progressively moved away from areas of greatest disadvantage to areas that are more affluent. And it is a really stark reminder of what's gone on in recent years. And as with many things, it will take us time if we win the election to get things into a better shape. But, as we showed last time around, education was a priority for us. It was reflected in the emphasis that we had from government, but also in our spending priorities. And, Rachel Reeves, as the daughter of two teachers, I know feels very strongly about how important education is, both to our society, but also if we have a really strong economy in the years to come. Teacher recruitment and retention is a massive, massive issue. And, part of it is, and I hear this, from people across the country, part of this is about valuing and respecting teaching. And it feels that education has just slipped way down the list of government priorities. And it's about working in partnership with people working in our education system. All too often, it's been a needlessly adversarial approach that we've seen from the government where, including during the pandemic, we saw the work of teachers and school support staff belittled, not valued and not recognised by ministers. But it is also, alongside the teacher recruitment and retention challenge, important to recognise, I think, the growing problem that we're seeing where it comes to school support staff too. That's what I hear on every school visit I do now about the challenges that come with recruiting school support staff. And I don't think the government fully recognise the brilliant work that our school support staff do. It's been such a privilege to work alongside our affiliated trade unions who work in this space, such as Unison and the GMB, and the commitment that we now have around bringing back a school support staff negotiating body so that school support staff have got a seat at the table and they've got a voice once more. And we also address some of those challenges around progression and training too. Around where it comes to teacher recruitment and retention, I've set out plans for a teacher training entitlement because I do think we need to give teachers more opportunities throughout their working lives to take on opportunities around training. Flexibility is absolutely a part of that. And I, I recognise particularly the challenges where it comes to, as the question described, around particularly women 30 to 39 or thereabouts, who have children, and the pressures that are there. I know the kind of teaching unions are working around that. I strongly believe there was more we can do in that space to improve kind of some of the options around flexibility, and we're working very closely with people right across the system around how we can, about the role for government in making that happen, but also what's the role, I think, especially for school leaders, for trusts, because they're struggling at the moment to recruit, and I think do want to, and in the post-pandemic world where graduates have other options which can involve working from home perhaps some days a week, that makes it that bit more of a challenge where it comes to teaching. And absolutely there is a challenge where it comes to some specialist, some of the specialisms. Maths is obviously one of them, some of the science subjects, but sadly right across the board we're increasingly seeing problems where it comes to recruitment. My view is that the best recruitment strategy that you can have is having a really strong retention strategy. We've got to make teaching an attractive place for the people who are there and use that as a basis on which we can build and get more people into teaching. We inherited a very similar situation back in 1997, and we absolutely addressed it, and I'm determined that we will do it once more. Very finally, I think the growing challenge that we're also seeing about people not wanting to step up to school leadership, because we're loading so much on the schools, we're loading so much onto the people that work there, and people are burning out. And I think my worry is also the number of head teachers I speak to who are perhaps coming to the end of their working life, who tell me they really don't know if they were to go, who would step up and replace them.
Absolutely. And if they were to have had that opportunity to do it again, perhaps they wouldn't have, because it's become a different beast. Now we are almost at the end. We've managed to pack in a lot. Huge apologies if I've missed your question and we haven't got to it. I imagine that Bridget has been a very diligent student during this event as well, and has taken in the comments there. Bridget did also mention that if you want more detail about Labour's education missions, then do go and look at that document, which spells Labour's offer out in a bit more detail. And I do believe there's also a Labour education staff network that you've asked people to join as well. I think they're signalling even more so that you are wanting to hear from people with those experiences of working across education to help shape Labour's policy as we move closer to that general election and hopefully the next Labour government. So before we close, I just want to say, Bridget, is there any final words that you would like to let everybody know on tonight's call?
Just to say thanks everybody for joining. It's been a really wide-ranging conversation that we've covered a lot of ground. We could have covered even more and talked for even longer on some of the topics, but I really appreciate everyone's contribution. I think just very finally, it does often feel at the moment, in a world where everything is broken and in a country where it feels like nothing is working at the moment, that change can't happen, and it absolutely can. And if we win the next election, we can and will transform the landscape where it comes to support for our children and families, and we'll put education right back at the heart of national life once more, as we did last time around. But if we're going to do that, then we have to win the next election, and I'm sure everyone on this call will be working really hard in their nearby target seat if they're not on a target seat themselves. But we've got to get more Labour MPs elected. We've got to win that majority and get Kiran to number 10 if we can deliver all of the things that we've been talking about this evening. And thank you very much, Kiran and Claire, for hosting and for setting all of this up, and for the amazing work the Labour Women's Network does year in, year out to provide such great opportunities for women to get involved, to contribute, and to find a place within the movement.
Thank you ever so much. You've done my job for me, Bridget, which was to say Labour Women's Network does do a fabulous job. And if you are not a member, please join us, because it will help us to do more. I think if they're not in the chat already, and they'll be going there soon, we've got LWN's upcoming training and our events. So we have more opportunities. Please do get involved. A newsletter went out today to members as well. It's always wonderful to be in the company of Labour women and particularly those who are members of the Labour Women's Network. Thank you ever so much. Thanks to people who've joined us. Thanks particularly to Bridget. I know that your time is pressured and we really do value the time you've spent with us this evening. That's all from me. Claire or Jane, did I miss anything? Can I dismiss? I feel as though I'm in an assembly situation now where I need to dismiss everybody from the call in an orderly fashion.
Absolutely not. Jane has popped in the comments the links to all of our upcoming training and future events. So just a huge thank you back from us to you, both of you. Bridget, it is so heartening to have fantastic women doing the breadth and depth of the ambitious and thoughtful work you're doing and being a front face of visible women within Labour's general election effort and hopefully next term government. And Kiran, I think you've done a very deft job at guiding a conversation that we could have all taken down 100 rabbit holes. So thank you both so much, and hope to see you all soon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, everyone.
You. Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone, really good. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thanks.
Bye. Well done.